Hey guys, this video is brought to you by Linode, one of my favorite companies. I've been doing business with Linode for 8 years now. They're growing all over the world. They're opening data centers all over the place. Mine is in New Jersey. However, they're opening up in Canada, Australia, India, everywhere. Linode makes it easy and affordable to host your app. Like I pay $20 a month. I've scaled it to 250,000 customers in a single month with just using about 5 to 10% of my available resources on a $20 a month account. So if you guys are looking to host something yourself, there's really no better company that I recommend than Linode. So make sure you guys check them out. The link is in the description tab below. All right, guys, so this is going to be the first video that I release on my Django course. I'm going to try to get more in-depth in Django than I've ever done before. And also, I just want to give a big shout out to Kevin, one of my viewers who's been watching me for years. Congratulations on the new job, dude. Like, I love hearing about people that get jobs because of my channel. That stuff makes me feel really good. Every time I think that, hey, maybe this isn't worthwhile, I get stuff like that, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to continue to do what I do. So hopefully you guys can follow along. And as far as Python Django, I think it's a great framework. I really miss the old days of when Python Django made things easier, you know, using just the Django template engine, some basic JavaScript and jQuery. But, you know, these days you can still use all the latest client-side frameworks with Django. So hopefully you guys can follow along in this series. This is just the first video. I'm literally building platforms from the ground up, so there will be a lot more to come. Hey guys, what's up? So in this new series, we're going to be looking at Django 2.2 for the latest version of Python. And Django is a web framework, which really just means it's a bunch of Python code that's centered around building websites. So the reason why you would want to learn Django in 2019 right now is that it is still one of, if not the most popular Python web framework out there. The only thing that's probably a close competitor at this point is Flask, which is considered for more smaller versions or micro websites or micro services called RESTful services for building APIs. That's where Flask really excels. However, Flask does not have a built-in administration system that we're going to see in our Django applications. That allows you to be able to control your content. So if you have a content-based website, there's not really a better alternative, in my opinion, than to use Django, even in 2019. It has built-in authentication, authorization, so that you can set up groups, have people that can access certain pages. And in this tutorial, we're going to see how to do all of that stuff. Some of the largest websites that are using Django right now is Instagram for their backend. Now, clearly, Django is not used for building mobile apps, and that may not be clear to you guys, but Django is not some sort of mobile app. So if you go and download Instagram from your app store or the iOS, Apple, whatever they call that, but that is actually not Django code. So they're still building an actual mobile app using whatever sort of technologies that they're doing in order to do that, whether it's a specific Android using the Java SDK. When it comes to Instagram, Django is used for actually their backend services. So when you're going and requesting the images to the phone, all that stuff is hitting a server that's actually running Django. There's a lot of other major websites that are using Django as well, though. Things like NASA.gov and The Onion, which is a news website, a very popular news website. Washington Post was originally created on the Django platform, and also Pinterest, but they don't use Django anymore. So sometimes companies, when they get really large like Pinterest, they can outgrow the actual framework and they start to kind of customize it to the point where it's not really Django anymore. But for most 99% of the people out there that are not going to build the next Pinterest, Django is probably going to suit your needs just fine. So there are a few requirements in order to get started with Django. One of them being that you do have to have Python downloaded and installed on your machine. The latest version of Python is 3.7.4 as of the time of this video. However, if you're using an earlier version of Python, that should be fine. And if it's also a more modern version, that should be fine as well. The code should be relatively similar, if not the exact same. But make sure you download that to whatever sort of operating system you have and install it. Also, to follow along in this tutorial series, I recommend that you download and install Visual Studio Code for actually writing your code. But you can use other editors if you want. Some people use regular Visual Studio or Atom or Sublime Text. It doesn't really matter, but you need something to write your code in that makes it a little bit easier to write. Nobody wants to write their code in a raw text file. Although you could actually use Notepad and write all your code inside this, but it would be a pretty terrible experience for everybody. All right, so one of the first things you need to know whenever you're dealing with a new project or a Django project specifically is you need to have somewhere on your computer that you're going to store the code. So I have a projects folder and I created a Django projects folder that I'm going to put all my Django projects into. So I want to open up Visual Studio Code to that folder that I just created. So we're going to go ahead and open that up. All right, so what I did is I opened up the folder to this Django projects. I'm going to right click from within Visual Studio Code. I'm going to say open in terminal. This is going to open up a command prompt. And if you're on a Mac, the terminal is the same thing, or Linux. And all of this stuff should be relatively similar, but there might be slight nuances or differences between Windows and everything else, because Windows is slightly different, I would say, from Linux and Mac. But either way, everything is very, very similar. So hopefully you guys know and you can follow along. But I don't think that there should be any reason why, just because I'm on a Windows machine, that you guys cannot follow along. Most of the code is going to be identical. There's just like a few things that we need to look at. One of the things that we need to do is we need to say pip install virtual environment. Now, the reason why we're doing this is pip, number one, is a package manager tool that comes with Python when you installed it. This just reaches across the internet and it downloads different projects in Python that you want to use. One of those projects that we want to use is virtual environment. And what that does is it allows us to section off our projects so that we can have multiple different Django projects using different versions of Django and even different versions of Python, as well as for each one of those projects, we want to make sure any dependencies that they have, because you'll see that Django can offer all kinds of different plugins that you can just quickly add to your application. But a lot of times those plugins can conflict with one another. So you don't want to have just one install of that package, because otherwise they're all going to try to use it. So if you have two different versions of Django and they're all trying to use the same shared package, you're going to end up running into package nightmares. So in order to get around that, we're going to use virtual environment, but you have to install it. So we're going to say pip install virtual env. Now here we went ahead and we installed it, and it says that there's a newer version of pip, so you can update that if you want. But in my case, I don't need to do that at this moment. We're going to go ahead and use virtual environment to create our environment. So when you say virtual env, the next argument, you need to put a space after that because you're invoking virtual environment, the package that you installed. Then you need to go ahead and declare whatever sort of package you're going to use. So in my case, I'll say env, just environment for short. You could call it whatever you want, but I just use env for whatever reason. Now this is going to actually create, like I said, this sectioned off code base so that anything we install once we activate the virtual environment is going to be just contained to that specific virtual environment. It's almost the reason why things like Docker exist, so that you can have all your dependencies managed, and essentially if everything is self-contained, you should be able to move it into onto another computer and just install everything you need and not have to run into any sort of dependency hell. All right, so now that that is done, if we do a dir on the directory, or ls if you're on Mac, you're going to see that we have this environment folder, the environment that we named, environment, env for short, and we're just going to cd into that. And we also need to cd into the scripts. And this is where it's slightly different between Mac and Linux, but you need to just go ahead and activate. So I'm going to say source activate. I think you have to say that on Linux actually, but on Windows it's not actually that case. You just have to actually say activate. And yeah, I believe that is the Linux command. So source activate, I believe, does that. So I could be slightly wrong, but if you just do a quick Google search on how to activate that, then you just need to make sure that once you do that, you're going to see the name of your environment to the left. And that means everything is now running inside this virtual environment, so you're good to go. So let's go back to the root directory of this Django projects folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to create our first Django application. So what we want to say is Django admin. Well, I'm sorry, before we do that, we need to go ahead and install our Django project to our specific environment. So we're going to say, just like we did with virtual environment, we're going to say pip install Django. And this will grab the latest version of Django. You can see 2.2.5 as we discussed, and this will install it into the virtual environment. All right, so it went ahead and installed successfully. And what I want to show you is if you go into your environment folder, go into the lib and then site packages, this is where it's going to show you all the dependencies that you've installed into the virtual environment. And when we created the virtual environment, it created its own version of pip and all this other stuff that you saw as it went through and installed. So these are all the dependencies that happen with pip. And then when we installed and created the virtual environment. And then we also have this Django dependency that we just installed. So you can see Django is right here. All the core Django code that you have for the entire framework is all self-contained inside of here. So everything is there. Django is an open source project. All of the code is available on GitHub. And that code, again, is right inside here in this local virtual environment folder. Now, we don't have to deal with that anymore, so I'm going to just close that down. And now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and create our first Django project using our local virtual environment Django install. So we're going to say Django admin.py, and this is a Python file. It's just a command line script that comes with Django that allows you to create projects. And we're going to say start project, and let's go ahead and give this a name. So this is going to be a music site, so we'll call it Noob Music. All right, so now that that's done, if we dir on the directory, you can see we now have this Noob Music folder. So now that I've done that, what I want to do is use Visual Studio Code to open up this Noob Music folder directly. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the starter code that was given to us for this new Django project. By default, what Django admin does is it creates a folder for whatever the project name is, and that project folder is going to have a manage.py file. And this is the file that actually runs all of the Django source code. And this is a very important file that we're going to see because we're going to use this in order to run the built-in Django server, to build our database tables, and do all kinds of other stuff that you'll see throughout this tutorial series. And by convention, there's also going to be called what is called a module or an app. Really, Django refers to it as a module. And this module is called Noob Music, which is the same name as the outer overall project that we created. So by default, whatever your project name is, you're going to have one module that is considered to be the main module of your Django application that also shares the same name. And inside of this, there's going to be a settings.py file. This settings.py file is one of the most important files in a Django application because this is what's going to have all the dependencies that you need for your Django application. It's all going to be listed inside of here. It's going to have all the middleware. All this middleware is built by default. But what middleware does is it really, if you make a request to a server, it goes through a basic pipeline. So you can just picture water flowing through a pipe. And each piece of middleware is one section of that pipe along the way that is doing something to that request, whether it's like parsing data, changing data, whatever it is. Django by default has all this stuff, and most of it is built in for security, things that are beyond the understanding of most software developers. These are some of the best developers in the world that deal with, you can see some of this middleware is for clickjacking. That's like a security flaw in a lot of different websites. Django covers all that for you, which is one of the great reasons for using it, especially when you don't understand how a lot of that stuff works or even what it is. Every Django module can have a URLs.py file. The URLs.py file is actually how the routing occurs inside a Django web application. And routing means that if I go to my website / whatever, that is where you define that whatever in your routing. So it says, oh, you went to whatever. This is how I know how to direct to do something based on that URL. But all the URLs for your application are going to be defined in this URLs.py file. And then finally, there is a WSGI.py file, and this is something you guys don't have to mess with, but this allows Django to operate on web servers such as Apache and Nginx and other things. So now let's look at the manage.py, and what I'm going to do is right click and say open in terminal. So I can have the terminal open to the root directory of the project, which is the outer Noob Music folder. And we're going to say Python manage.py and then say run server. This is a built-in web server that you can use for Django development, but it's not something that you're going to use in production. But it does make your life much easier when you're trying to just see the code changes that you have. So if I control click using Visual Studio Code, you can see that we have our Django application up and running. And let me show you one of the best features of Django, and that is the admin. So this admin here is like an entire back-end administration panel that allows you to maintain all of your site's content. There's still no other web framework that has a better admin, in my opinion, and Django's had that for 10 years running now. Now, if we want to stop the server, if you go to the command line, just press Control-C, and that will stop the server from running. All right, guys, so now that we have a running, working Django application, everything's good to go. But what we need to do is add some functionality to this. So Django is all about modular, meaning that your code, your entire application is broken up into separate little self-contained chunks. And the way Django is architected, all those chunks are able to work together seamlessly. But by keeping things separate, that is one of the coding philosophies that people abide by. It's really called encapsulation. It just means that you have certain pieces of your application that are handling certain things. So you could have modules for, in our case, we're going to create our first module called a band module. And it's going to handle literally all the logic that we need for dealing with viewing and showing bands for this music website. So in order to create the first module, let's go ahead and right click and say open in terminal. All right, so to create this band module, we're going to say Python manage.py or py and say start app band. All right, so now it created a folder that looks just like our main folder of new music, but we now have this band module. And this band module slash app is going to have a few more things than other apps like the main one for our project, and that is an admin.py. We're going to see that you're going to be able to customize your administration panel using this file so that you can see more or less information about your particular piece of data, which in this case is a band. The apps.py, don't worry about that. Models is how we actually design our database tables. Tests are how we create unit tests from within the Django ecosystem so that we can test our code. And really, if you're doing production level development, you're going to have to unit test most of your code. So all the core functionality of, I need to add this to that or do this or that or make a database call or something like that. Some of that stuff should be mocked, but most of it's going to be inside this testing framework right here. And then the views.py, we're going to see that Django is an MVC web framework, and MVC stands for Model View Controller. MVC goes back literally to like Smalltalk in the 1970s. All of a sudden in the late 90s with Ruby on Rails, it kind of reinvented the MVC model pattern for building websites. And even to this day, most web application developers are building CRUD apps, meaning create, read, update, and delete. They're building those types of apps using an MVC architecture, whether it's in C# or .NET or Node or something else. It's still sort of an MVC pattern. Django diverges from the MVC pattern just slightly because it's more like model view template versus model view controller, but it's still very fundamentally the same thing. So we'll see all that stuff, but all your actual core logic, like if you're making a database call or something like that to grab data and then return it on a request to your web application, you would actually do all that in your views.py file. All right, so let's go ahead and look at creating our first view for our band. And we're going to go ahead and just define the main, we'll just call it the index. This is going to be our first controller endpoint. So by default, any sort of controller endpoint that you have on your views.py file, it needs to take in a request object. That's the request object coming from the customer that is going to your website. So those things can contain headers that are being sent, or like you could get like the user's IP address and such. All that stuff is going to be inside the request object. It's a really complicated object, but you just need to know that your function needs to take that in. And this is just a basic Python function. And what we're going to do is just say return render. And by default, this is already importing render that you need, which is just another function from within Django. And the first argument is going to be your request object. What was passed in gets passed back. And then the second thing is going to be, it's going to go to your template. So we're going to say band index.html. This is going to be the main template. We're going to see in just a moment how to actually create templates, but for right now, let's go ahead and just put band/index.html. And then we need to pass back just like a simple empty object. And here we're going to say hello, and the value is going to be world. And this also needs to be in quotes. So hello world. And this is a Python dictionary that is being returned. So it's just key value pairs. So if you needed to return data to your template, this is how you're going to do it. And in our case, we're just going to have a hello piece of data that is a value of world. All right, so what I want to show you guys is how to deal with templates in Django. And this is actually something that throws beginners off. You can do things in one of two ways. There is a root folder that you can do for your templates, where if I were to say, let's create a folder, we're going to show you the one way first. So templates, and then inside of here, I could have a separate folder for my band, And then we're going to create a new file for index.html. And here we're just going to return a simple hello world template. All right, so this is just standard HTML, but how do we get Django to actually serve this up? We need to make some changes to our settings.py file. Number one, because we have this app called band, we need to go ahead and add it to our installed apps. So add that. Also in the back end directories, this is where you need to actually declare where is your templates folder living. So there is a shorthand at the top. You're going to see this base directory. And this is something we can just simply add right down here to the directory argument, wherever that is, right here. And we could say, hey, this is where the templates folder is living. So in order to tell this, tell Django, we can use the OS operating system module that is already imported at the top of our settings file and say ospath.join. And we're going to paste in this base directory argument. And the second argument is we're going to say it's a templates folder. So by default, look in this root folder of your project and the templates in the root folder of the project right here. And because we said in our views.py file of our band module, we said that we want you to look in the band folder of that templates folder and return the index.html. Now, what we need to do is add a URLs file to our band so that we can set up routing so that we can actually request the band page. And to do that, we're going to create a new file called urls.py. So I need to import some stuff to work from. I'm going to say from django.urls import path, and then we're going to say from dot, which is the root directory, import the views folder or file, and we're going to go ahead and define our URL patterns list, which is just a Python list. And here we're going to use the path module that we imported, and we're just going to give no argument, meaning that find the index. So if we just say my app /band, it's going to hit this empty path routing, and it's going to be our default route for our app. So here we could say views.index is what we want you to return, and then we need to give it a name, and we're just going to say it's the index page. All right, so now that we have this URLs file defined in our band module, we want to go ahead and add that to our main module here so that the routing actually works. And this is going to be your centralized routing. So this is where all your imports from other modules and stuff are all going to be put inside here. So where we say import path, put a comma and then say include, which is another little helpful feature for being able to reference other apps URLs files. And we're going to put a comma because every single thing in a Python list has to be comma delimited or separated by a comma. And we're going to say path, and here we can say band. And the next argument is we're going to say include. We're going to use that module that we just imported, which is the include module. And we're going to say use the band.urls. All right, so now we're referencing band's URLs just like that. So we have this one centralized location where all our routing is going to be handled. So in order for our application to actually see, we added the band. That's good. Actually, I already did that. So now we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and right click and say open in terminal. And we're going to say python manage.py run server. All right, so here we're going to look at our first error message, and this error message is going to occur anytime there's some sort of problem. But what's going to happen is some error message is going to be raised. In this case, it's saying improperly configured, and it's complaining about the URL config. And the reason why is I have an actual typo. The pattern that we're exporting needs to actually say URL patterns and not pattern, and that's the reason for this problem. So now that we've fixed that, you can see it's actually compiling just fine. If we control click, we get to our main page of our application. Because we've now defined URLs, we're going to get a page not found on the main page of our application where before it had the Django starter code, so we don't have that anymore. We'll eventually add a root homepage to our app, but for right now I want to show you how to navigate over to the band. And now we're actually delivering HTML from our Django application. Now what I want to do is also show you guys another and better way to handle dealing with templates, because if you have a lot of different apps, it's a much better idea to actually keep all your templates self-contained into the module for which they exist. So you want to create a templates folder inside the band, and here we're just going to say index.html, and this message will say another better way of doing this. And I don't care about the capitalization, but because we're doing it this way, what I want to do is get rid of the templates band folder. So we're going to remove that. Some people prefer to have one centralized templates directory, and we're probably going to need that at some point, but for right now, we're not going to mess with it. In fact, we're going to delete that altogether. The better thing, I think, is to have your templates self-contained into each individual module. And you'll see that if you actually look at the Django source code, the way that they do the admin and have all the templating for the admin, it's done in the same exact way. So in our settings.py, we can keep everything the way that it was, but when you see this app directories, by default, it's going to say true. And that means that it's going to look for a templates folder and whatever sort of apps that you have installed. So it's going to automatically look inside of here. And what we need to do, though, is we do need to adjust the views.py. Instead of saying that there's a banned folder, it no longer exists. We just need to say return the index. And by default, it will look in the band and return that index file. So if we control click and go to our application and say /band, and you can see that we now have a better way of delivering our templates. All right, guys, so now what we're going to do is add the home page of our application. And in order to do that, we're going to create a templates folder in the root directory. And inside of here, we're going to create our index.html file. And we'll just have a header message that says home page. And in the new music app, we want to go ahead and create a views.py file. So we're going to say from Django, shortcuts, import render, define the index, which takes in the request object, this is just a Python method. And we're going to say return render, the function that we imported. And it takes the request object as the first argument. Then a path to the templates, which is just going to be index.html, and we'll just leave it at that. Now we need to modify our urls.py file of the new music app to add a path to that, and we're going to say deliver the views.index, give it a name equals index. Make sure there's a comma after every URL that you're adding, and because we're using the views, we need to go and import that. So we're going to say from import views. All right, so we can use that views index method that we just defined on this. All right, so now in order for all this to work, I want to show you a little piece of a strange thing that happens that kind of throws people off. So we're going to say right click, open in terminal, and run the server again. And I'm going to show you that we can now deliver that home page. However, if you go to the band, you're going to see that the same home page is being rendered. And it's because we have a naming collision. And this is actually by default, where Django has the ability, if you bring in an app that it like overrides your home page, then it's by default going to grab whatever the first match is. So it's going to look inside this templates directory first. So the best thing to do in order to handle this sort of thing is to give a different name to this this templates directory. So if we go to views, really we should probably just call this band.html, and then we should change this template from index to band. So that way it's not being overwritten by the root directory here. So it's going to look for templates and band. So if we're looking at the home page, this is the root of our application, and we get the home page. And then if we go to band, you can see that we get this separate template. So really with just this information here and delivering templates, you can almost build websites from this, but we're still missing some core pieces like how to deliver static content for JavaScript and images and CSS. All right, guys, so we're rocking and rolling. So now what we need to do is look at how do we actually load static files, meaning CSS, JavaScript, and images into our templates. And there's a little bit of a setup that you have to do. Now, by default, you should have the static URL defined already that points to the static URL. And if that's not there, just make sure you add it. And what we're going to do is add another argument, which is called static files dirs, which is short for directories. And this is going to be a list of different locations that Django can look for static files for your app. And here what we want to do is use the OS module, go path, join. And like we did before, we're going to use the base directory. And the second argument is just going to be the static folder. All right, so now that we've registered this static folder, let's go ahead and put the static folder in our root directory. So we're going to right click, say new folder, create this static folder. Inside of here, we're going to create another folder for CSS, and we're going to add our first CSS file, so main.css. And let's go ahead and change the H1 and make it color red so that we can see that it's working, because it's black by default. And let's modify the root directory of our application here. So I'll keep this here, but let's go ahead and put in the regular HTML that all pages should have. So it should have the opening and closing head, have a title inside there. And we also need a body tag. And we can paste this into the body. And let's go ahead and load the static file that we need. So we're going to say link relation style sheet. This is how you load a CSS file, and give it an href. Now here, this is where we're going to use a special template syntax that Django uses, which is this opening curly brace and a percent sign. And then you always have to have a closing percent sign. So inside of here, what we can say is use the static loading module. And then the second argument is just simply saying, okay, since this is pointing to the static folder now, let's go ahead and load the main.css file from the CSS folder. All right, and let's go ahead and close this off. And anytime you're going to be using the static, you need to actually at the top of your template and another percent syntax type of thing, we're going to say load static. And this tells Django, hey, we're going to be using our static handler from our settings.py file. All right, now if you restart the server and you navigate to your home page, you're getting the location you're getting a working CSS file. So that's going to be how you add CSS to your project. But not just CSS, we can do the same thing with JavaScript. So a static folder should always have a JavaScript file in here. And we're just going to go ahead and create our first JavaScript, and we'll just say first file.js. And it's going to be an alert message that says this is working. And again, anytime you're dealing with a static file, it's best to load your scripts at the bottom just before the closing body tag. And we're going to say source. And again, we're going to be using the static helper, and we're going to say JS first file.js. Close that off. This actually has to be inside single quotes, this second argument. And let's close off our script. And if we go back to our page and refresh, we also have now working JavaScript. All right, guys, so now let's go ahead and stop our server. And this section, what we want to do is actually create a super user, like the overall root admin user for your project. There's always one super user that has all the ultimate permissions in order to change data and access the backend system. And in case you don't remember what I'm talking about, if we go /admin, this is the admin location of our app. We can't log in though, because there's actually no overall user. There's no super user yet, so you can't log in. So in order to fix that problem, let's go to the root directory of our project, and we're going to use Python, the manage.py file to create that super user. And it's actually one command called create super user. Now, some of you guys may get this, that there's no such table auth user. And what that means is that we need to actually go ahead and create our migrations first. So what we're going to say is Python manage.py create migrations. Or it's make migrations. My bad. These commands sometimes fail me. And if it says there's no changes directed, what you need to do for the first time, then you just need to migrate. All right, so now it's creating this auth table for us. Python comes with SQLite as a database that it's automatically included with Python, and that's what Django's using. So although Django supports all the major databases out there, everything from Oracle to like MySQL or Postgres, this is the best way to get started, is just to use the simple SQLite database that comes with Python. So this now created that auth table for us. So now we can go back up and run our create super user command. Now we're going to use the name admin, and we can leave the email blank. That's fine. And I'll go ahead and put in a password. It's too common. That's fine. I don't care. All right, so now that we've actually created our super user, let's go ahead and start the server again. And we can navigate to the admin. And we can now log in. So if we use the password that we just created, we can now log into our backend admin site. And this is pretty sweet. All right, so if you're going to be a full stack Django developer, it means that you need to be able to deal with the database and understand how it works. So the good thing is that Django comes with something called an object relational mapper, which basically writes all your SQL code for you. So you don't have to be a SQL expert in order to be a full stack developer. So by default, when we created our bands app, we have this models file here, and we're going to get rid of the starter code. And we're going to go ahead and define our band model. And it's going to be a class that needs to subclass the models.model. And you can see that we're importing models by default up here. So what we're doing is just creating a new class that subclasses that, meaning that it inherits from it. And let's go ahead and say we're going to have a band title. So we want that to be a models.character field. And we can put a max length on here of, really, I'll just say 150 characters. Well, we'll just be safe. So 200 characters. And I also want this to be unique. So I don't want to have more than one band with the same title. Like, so you need to have like a unique title. If you want something to be unique, then this will put that constraint on it. And let's go ahead and just do the same thing for origin. And we'll say models.character field. And the same thing, max length 200. And this is not unique, so we don't care about that, because obviously there could be multiple bands from the same location. And let's do an image, and this is going to be the same thing. We can just copy this. All right, and then finally, let's go ahead and just put a bio. And this is going to be a models. Instead of a character field, this is going to be a text field, which is, you could put a max length on here as well, but the text field is more for like larger stuff. So let's just say the biography for the band shouldn't be more than like 2,000 characters. That's fine. All right, so anytime you either make a change to a model file or you add a model file, you need to go ahead and run your make migrations again. So we're going to say go back and run those commands that we had before. So make migrations, and you can see that it picked up on the fact that band changed. So then we can run the migrate command one more time. All right, so this now applied this. So now if I run the server again, you're going to see that we don't have the band showing up in our admin right now. So if we want to see the bands in the admin, we have to do a little bit of work to the admin file. So let's go ahead and pull that up, and we're going to need to import our models file because we're going to be using it. So we're going to say from dot import models. And really, we could do this shorthand. We could say from dot models import the name of the band class that we defined. So we could just do it shorthand like that. Now we need to go ahead and register that. So we're going to say admin.site.register, and then we just pass in the name of our class. And I'll get rid of the starter code. So now by doing that and registering this, if we refresh, you can see that the bands now shows up. And if I click on this, I can now add a band through the admin here. So I just went ahead and added my favorite band, and they're from Queens, New York. And we need to have some sort of image. So let's go ahead and grab the free image from Wikipedia. So here I'll just use this image. So I'm going to copy the image address and just paste that right in here. And then we're going to say a band from Queens, New York. All right, once you have that model, go ahead and save it. And you can see we get this band object showing up. Now, it doesn't tell us much. Obviously, we have to click on it to figure out its base side. I'll tell you how to fix that problem in just a moment. Actually, let's go ahead and just do that now. So if you go back to your band models file, we can go ahead and put a method on our class here that we're going to say define the string. And it's going to take in itself as the first argument. And we're just simply going to say return self.title. You could have it return whatever piece of data you want, but this is going to return the title. So that way when we look at our admin and we click on bands, it's now showing up as base side. Now what if I were to say, you know what, let me try to add another base side, and I go to save it. You can see that there's, well, even if I put in some data here to satisfy this, because everything's required by default, but you could actually say whether or not something should be. But here this gives you the message, the constraint, hey, this band already exists. So that's why we put that unique equals true. And we didn't have to write any SQL in order to do that, which is really nice. All right, so one thing I do want to explain is that by default for all your models that you create with Django, it already comes with an ID. So every band is going to have a unique ID associated with it, and it's done automatically. So like, let me go back to the bands here, and if I click on base side, you can see it's band 1. It's like it's going to reference based on that. So every time you add a new band, even if you delete it, it's always going to increment up 1. That way, no matter what, every record in your database has some sort of unique identifier to it. All right, so let's go ahead and look at how we can create a dynamic route in order to get an individual band based on that unique ID. And it's actually pretty easy to do. We're going to go to the bands models, urls.py file, and we're going to create a new path. And this is going to use a built-in helper that says, hey, we're going to pass an integer, which is the band ID. And this could be whatever name you want it to be, but this is going to say, hey, this URL is just simply going to have some sort of band ID associated with it. And we're going to create a detail view in just a moment. And we'll say the name is detail. All right, so let's go over to the views, and we need to create the index for that. So here we're going to say detail, and it's going to take in the request object. And for right now, we're going to return the simple stuff that we need, and we'll say detail.html. And for right now, that's all we're going to deal with. Now, because we have this this band ID, what we can do is we can now pass that in to say band ID. And this is going to be associated with whatever you put in your URL. So like over here, we said band ID. If I said band or something, then I would put in my views band. But we said band ID, so that's why we're saying this. So just for craps and gigs, let's go ahead and say we're going to have a test field. This is a Python dictionary of key value pairs, and we're just going to say, hey, return the band ID that gets passed in. And let's go over to the band templates, and we're going to create a details.html file. And we're going to reference that value that we're passing down. So if you want to reference a value that you're passing down, you use these 2 curly braces syntax. And we just have to say whatever it is that we're passing down. So band ID, or what did we say, testing? Yeah, we said test. Whatever this is, let's just say band ID. We need to make this clear. So band ID. All right, and close some of these files out. Go to the details, and now we're referencing the band ID. So if everything goes well, and we can deliver this template just fine, then we should see the band ID that we're passing in as the value that shows up. We also have a invalid syntax. You can see where it's blowing up here in the urls.py, and it's because this is a Python list, so everything has to be comma delimited, so everything's separated by a comma. And now if we go over here and we navigate over to band and we just pass in whatever we want, 23, we get template doesn't exist. And that's because of yet another typo. If we look at what we did here, we said detail, which is what I wanted, but I said details on the template, so I need to rename that. And these are the type of bugs that you're going to run into all the time, so it's probably good to see this in action here. So now that that's working, let's refresh this, and you can see that we get the band 23. We don't have a 23 band, but 1 is the Bayside band that we want. But how do we get the actual Bayside data in here? All right, so in order for that to show up and work, what we want to do is alter the views.py from our band file, and we're going to say from view or .models import band, because we're going to be using the band model here. So now I can actually say, you know what, band equals band.objects.get, which means get one single thing if it matches. So we're going to say PK, which stands for primary key, and we're going to pass in this band ID value that is being passed in right here. So we're just going to reference that. We're going to say PK equals the band ID. So if everything goes well, we're now going to have this band object. So let's go ahead and change this, and we're going to say band and reference the band object that we just queried. And if we go to the detail, we can now say, you know what, instead of this, we want to say band.title, which is the name of the band. And we really probably want to reference this in an H1, make it a little bigger. All right, so this is our band details template now. So now that we've done all that, let's go ahead and refresh, and we get Bayside. Boom, we just queried our database, got some dynamic data, and we now can display this stuff. And if we wanted to display more information, it's just as easy as referencing it. So we have an image reference, right? So I can put an image tag in here. And here I could just say, I want your source to be the band.image. And we go back and we refresh, and we now have this band image. It's really huge. So we could use some HTML attributes to just change that. I'll just have a width of 500 pixels so that the height will automatically adjust. And we go to refresh that, and we can see that we have a more reasonable image size there. It's still too big though. So I'll change this down to be just a little bit smaller. And we could even use like dynamic like alt tags here, where we can reference our band.title here, so we can have proper HTML for people that are blind that use the alt tags and stuff. And let's go up and put a P. Actually, we'll do a lesser H header, so we'll do like an H3 here for the origin, band.origin. All right, and if I could spell that right. And finally, let's go ahead and put inside of a P tag our band.bio. So now we're referencing all pieces of our data. Go back to the page, refresh, and we have Bayside, Queens, New York, and we have our bio, a band from Queens, New York. So just like that, we're able to dynamically get and query the database for the band that matches the parameter that was passed into the URL. And that is a very powerful way to reuse a lot of code, because you could have a million bands and we don't have to write any more code to do it. Now, I do want to show you though, if you try to query a band that does not exist, your app is going to blow up. And by default, your Django app is set up so that the debugging information is turned on. But if you ever go to put your production Django project on a server, then you never want to display this information. This is stuff that a hacker would be able to take and run with it. So luckily though, Django has a shortcut that we can use to prevent this error from cropping up if the band does not exist. So again, we put a band that does exist, it works just fine. One that doesn't, it blows up. So how do we prevent it from blowing up? We go back to our code, and inside the views where we're doing our query, there is another shortcut that we can say get object or 404, which means page not found. So get object or 404, and we can now use that. So instead of saying band objects.get, we just actually say we reference that built-in function get object or 404, but the first argument that needs to be passed to it is the band model object. So you query it just the same, but this little shorthand way of doing it, now the app will not blow up. So again, this works just the same. It's querying just fine. But if we try to give a band that does not exist, we get a 404 page not found. Now again, because debugging is turned on, we get this this helpful debug equals true. And if I were to say, you know what, I want that to be false, we could just go to the settings. So if you were going to go to a production website, you're going to go to the settings of your main app, and where it says debug, you could say false. And now because you did that, you're going to have to run the server over again. Oh, and then allowed host. If debug allowed host, just put a star in here, just like that, so it'll allow it. And now if we go to band 1, that's Bayside. Give it something that doesn't exist, and you get a simple 404, so nobody's getting any sort of debug information about your website. So let's go ahead and turn the debugging back on, though, because we do need that. And you pretty much always want that when you're developing. And you can keep the allowed host in there, that's fine. That's a wildcard that really just allows any host, but if you have, like, if I have noobmusic.com or something like that, then I would put that specifically in there. So again, we get our debugging turned back on. All right, guys, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and add user authentication to our website. So how do users come to our website and sign up so that they might be able to see information that is hidden behind a login? A lot of times you want to have content that is hidden only to customers that paid and things like that. But before you can even sign up and figure out who paid, you have to have an authentication system set up so that you can register new users. And that's what we're going to do now. Luckily, though, Django has some built-in tools to make this process relatively easy compared to what it could be. So let's go into our URLs. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new page under our main, just below the index here, the home page of our app. Sorry, my phone be blowing up all the time. All right, let's go ahead and put our path in here. This is going to be where we actually register. So the account is going to be register, and we're going to say views.register, and name equals register. Let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys. All right, let's go to the home template, and we're going to put a link up here at the top. And normally we're going to have like a navigation here. Eventually we'll have that, but I'll just go ahead and put that in the nav right here. So we'll have the nav. And here, there's a shorthand that we can do when we're creating anchor links, which is how you connect from one page to the next. There is a shortcut in Django where you can just simply say URL and then give it the name, whatever the name of your URL that you want it to go to. So in this case, it's register. And inside the curly braces or inside the tags, just say register. All right, let's go and modify the views now to use that new register endpoint. So we're going to do a shortcut here from django.contrib.auth.forms. We're going to import the user creation form. And this is just a shorthand way. Django has a built-in form system that we're going to see more throughout this tutorial series, but for right now, this is going to be a way for us to quickly make the user registration form that is required to make a new user in the Django database. So let's create the define register endpoint. And we're going to go ahead and say our form equals the user creation form. And it's a method, so you need to call it as a method. And then we're going to return it. We'll create our templates, but for right now, I want to have this in a separate folder because there's going to be a bunch of different templates that we need for an actual registration process, like resetting your password and all that other stuff. But for right now, let's go ahead and do the register.html page. And then here, we also want to pass back the form. All right, let's go ahead and create our templates folder here for our registration. And then we're going to create the register.html file. And we'll worry about making our templates look a little bit better later. But for right now, let's just go ahead and do our raw HTML inside here. Now, what we need is a form tag. And the type is going to be post. Anytime you're actually sending data to your server, that's going to be considered a post. And if you're just getting data, then you typically want to do a get. Django comes with a lot of built-in security protections that you don't need to worry about, but one of the things that you always have to pass whenever you're posting data to your server is the cross-site forgery protection. This is the token that you pass in. You always put that at the top of your form, so that should be like the first thing below your opening form element. And then we can register all the contents of the form that we're passing down to the template just by saying form.asp. All right, now we need an actual button to go ahead and submit this. So we're going to have a type submit. That way, if they hit enter, it'll automatically submit. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and fire up the server again. And here's the app. And if we click on the register, it's going to automatically link to the registration page. But here, if we put in a password or a username, testing user, and here the password, blah, 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 you can put in whatever, but I would just want to show you nothing's going to happen here. It's actually going to be just a blank form. And the reason why is because we didn't actually set up our endpoint to take in the data. So no information got registered there. So in order to fix this so that it actually registers a user, we need to go ahead and modify our views. And inside of here, what we can do is we can actually do an if statement to say if the request method equals post, because what's happening is that this is doing a get and it's returning the basic form. But if you post, you're posting to the same endpoint, but we need to be able to differentiate a get from a post. So we're going to look at the request.method and we're going to say if it equals post, then we want the form to be then we want our form to equal the user creation form, and then you're going to pass in the request.post. All right, and then we could say if, and this is where we're actually going to verify if the form is valid. So there's a built-in helper, so we can just say if form.isValid, and this is a method call as well, so you need to call it as a method. Then we could say the user equals form.save, and this is going to save the actual data into our database. And then we just want to go ahead and return a redirect statement. We're going to return to the index. So we're going to redirect and then just say go back to the index page. However, if the form is not valid or if this thing is being rendered for the first time, then we're just going to do a simple else condition here. And the else is going to be what we had before, which is going to just deliver a blank page with a blank form. All right, now because we're using this shorthand redirect, we also need to import that from Django shortcuts. So say redirect. All right, so now let's go ahead and try this out. So we're going to create our test user, testing user, put in a password here, and click sign up. So here we get the CSRF token is missing or incorrect. And the reason for that error is because we actually have a typo here. It needs to be request.method. All right, so go ahead and put in your testing user. And if we click sign up, it'll take you back to the home page. Now to see this user in action, if we log into our admin, we now have this testing user that is now registered to the site. So we can give this person all kinds of custom permissions, and all that stuff can be done here through the admin. You can also create groups inside your admin to assign people to groups that you create, and certain groups could have permission to certain pieces of your application and others do not. But that is, in a nutshell, what groups are used for. All right, guys, so Django has built-in helpers that allow us to log in and log out easily, and the URLs are already created for us. So we just need to actually tinker with some settings here. But one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to include a new URL path. And this is going to go to accounts. And here, this is where we're going to use something called an include. So we need to go ahead and import this, or we already are at the top from Django URLs include. And then we can actually make reference to Django's contrib. This is a part of the Django project that is where the authentication is. But you're referencing the URLs that are already built in. So the URLs for logging in and logging out are included inside of here. So now if we go back to the index.html and we're going to add a login. So let's go ahead and paste this in. And we can reference the name, login. We need to create an actual login form. So let's do that. And we're going to copy everything from register into the login, but change the name. All right. So now if we go to the home page, if we click on login, you're going to see it automatically links to accounts login. And if we just put our information in here, this thing's going to try to redirect to an accounts profile page. And this setting can actually be updated in our settings py file. So let's go to the settings py. And there should be something in here called login and there's not. So what we need to do is actually add a setting for our login redirect, and Django will automatically log in to a page that you tell it. All right, so the setting key is going to be called login redirect URL, and it's just a string. So we're going to tell it to go to the index, the home page of our app. And then while we're out at it, let's go ahead and change the login or log out redirect URL equals, that's also going to go to the index page. So now if we go ahead and look at this and we log in, you can see after you log in, it takes us back to the home page. But we now need some logic here to say, you know what, this person is already logged in, so clearly you don't want to give them a registration link or a login link. In fact, you need to give them a log out link if they're logged in. So we need to go ahead and add some template conditions to our home page. All right, so let's go back to the index page where our logic is for the login link. And what we're going to do, this is going to be a condition, an if-else condition from within our template. So any sort of if-else condition has to be inside these curly braces. And we can just simply say if user.is authenticated, and then we're going to say the link that we want is log out, since they're authenticated, meaning they're logged in. So I'm going to change this to log out. So let's change our logout text to say logout. Otherwise, we're going to say else. We're going to give them the log in. And then anytime you have these curly brace if else conditions, you always have to close it off. So if it's an if, you have to have an end if. If it's a for, you have to have an end for. So now if we look at the app, by the way, let's get rid of this annoying alert message. My goodness, that is so annoying. I'm getting rid of it right now. All right, so we're going to go into our static JavaScript first file, get rid of that. We know our JavaScript's working now. All right, so let's go back to the home page. Now, the demonstration, you can see it's working as expected because this person is logged in. Please stop doing that. By the way, if you ever run into a situation where things are caching, if you right click and say inspect element in Chrome to open up your command or Chrome developer tools here, and if you just hold down the refresh key, you can say empty cache and reload. Sometimes you have to do that to refresh and reset your JavaScript file. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. So log in, we're logged in. Now that they're logged in, you can see that there's a log out link. I'll make it bigger. And you can see that we still have the registration or register link there. So we want to go ahead and fix that. Let's go ahead and make that a conditional as well. So really, we want to take this and put that in the else condition, because if they're not currently logged in, then they either need to log in or they need to register. And now they're just simply given this log out. So if you log out, it logs them right out, redirects to the home page because of our settings and the settings.py file. Log in, can log in, refreshes them to the home page. So now you have a working authentication system within Django. All right, and then one other piece of information I want to show you. If somebody is logged in, let's go ahead and put a little message inside a span here. So we're going to say hi, and then whatever their username is. So we can say user.username. And we can do an exclamation mark and then give them the chance to log out after that. Clearly, we got some ugly HTML going. It's all like inline, in one anchor tag. So Anchor's using the default styling. So once we add some more custom styling to our app, this will look a lot better. But now you're actually getting the username of the person logged in. All right, guys, so what we need to do now is give the ability to the user to be able to change their password. Now, by default, Django's URLs for the admin, when we included it in our urls.py, it's actually going to link to the actual Django admin, and we don't want people actually using that admin. So we want to go ahead and create a template in our registration folder, which is going to override the template actually showing up as the admin, because we want to hide that from our users. So let's go ahead and create that now. So we're going to say password change form.html. And then we're going to create another one for our success. So after they change the password, we need a template to display something that says that the password was changed successfully. So the password change done. You successfully changed your password. All right, and then the change form, let's go ahead and do that the same way that we did the login, basically. And we're going to copy all that in. All right, so let's go ahead and try this out. But before we can do that, we need to go to the home page and add another link for changing the password if they're logged in. So the URL for this one is going to be password change. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and check this out, see if it works. You got to put in the old password that you had before. I'm just going to select that. Yeah, I'll just select that, and I'll put in the new password. And we successfully changed our password. Now, what you could do on this template, you don't have to display this template. In fact, you could just do like a redirect if you wanted to, directly to your home page. But for right now, we have this separate page, so it's not actually sending us back to the account, to the admin anyway. All right, so let's go ahead and create a profile page. So similar to what we have on Stack Overflow here, if you see the individual user, they're using the same template over and over again. It's just I'm logged in, so it's displaying my data versus somebody else's. I need to update this, by the way. But we're going to do the same thing here. So let's go ahead and create our profile endpoint. This is going to be inside the templates here. Let's go ahead and create that. And in H1, we're going to say, actually, we'll just say user.username as a variable, so it's dynamic, and then say profile page. And we need to add the URLs as well. All right, so we have the profile page. Now, by default, this is going to be accessible to anybody regardless whether or not you're logged in or not. So you can see if I just navigated right over to it that I can get to it, and that's a problem. We want to restrict this to make sure that users are signed in. Now, like I'm already signed in here, but what we want to do is there's a conditional flag that we can put on top of our view that says, hey, nobody's allowed to access this if they're not logged in. So to see that in action, if I were to log out and then try to go to the profile page, you can see that I don't get the username showing up, but I see this profile page when I shouldn't see it because I'm not logged in. So how do we restrict that to users that are just logged in? So like I said, there is a helpful flag that we can actually import, and it's going to come from our Django contrib auth decorators. So we're going to say from django.contrib.auth.decorators. Import login required. And then anytime you put a decorator above a view, you're going to use an @ symbol, and you just reference the login required. So now this particular page is going to be restricted to only logged in users. So since we're logged out of the site, if we refresh, you're going to see that we automatically get redirected to the login page. But it also puts a conditional query string on here that says, hey, when you log in, I want you to redirect to this particular page. So it automatically recognized that we were trying to get to the profile page. It required a login, so it makes us log in, and then it'll send us back to the profile page. So Django does all that work for us. All right, guys, if you're still with me after all this time, thank you for watching. Thank you for all the people that have supported my channel over the years. This is going to be the first video in a series of videos that I'm going to do. We're going to build entire stacks in Django. I'm going to show you exactly what you need to know in order to be a full stack developer with Django and all the other client-side frameworks and everything that you need. All right, so make sure you guys subscribe and give a like if you would, and be on the lookout for the next video. Thank you. Bye.